Just a normal bank holiday Monday in August 2020. A family day, children playing, life moving as normal. But for Melinda Hickey, everything changed with one simple question. Where's Therese? What followed would become the most terrifying experience of her life. A race against time, a fight for life, and 40 minutes that would change a family forever. My name is Carol McGirl. I'm a qualified nurse, health and safety trainer, and the host of SatNaving Life, a podcast where we explore the moments that stop people in their tracks and the strength it takes to find a way forward. We delve into the roads that people travel as they navigate life's challenges and transformations, and explore how these roads shape resilience, growth, and meaning along the way, whilst reflecting on how knowledge, preparedness, and response can sometimes mean the difference between life and death. Today, Melinda shares her story with incredible honesty and courage. A story of trauma, fear, instinct, emotional agility, and survival. A story that raises the kind of what-if questions many of us avoid thinking about until tragedy suddenly makes them real.
The way I kind of looked at it at that point was he had given me this child. He loved her more than I did. And Therese was in his hands. I don't even think that there was any words, but I could just see the vulnerability. A mother just wanting to do something to help her son. She just sat beside him, and you could see in her this longing to protect her son, and him just in the depths of despair. We've stayed in fight or flight. I don't know in the last 6 years whether me and Paul have ever got to the stage of just being happy.
In this episode, we gain powerful insight into the reality Melinda and her family faced that day, and how in those critical moments, the human fight or flight response drove immediate action when every second mattered. Good afternoon, Melinda. Thank you so much for being here and trusting us with your story.
Thank you for having me, Carol.
No problem. I'm so thrilled to have you. Melinda, can you bring us back to that day and tell us how it all began?
It was the August bank holiday weekend, the 3rd of August 2020. I was 39 weeks pregnant, and 3 of my 4 children were at home with me. Norcan was 18, and then Ava, 3, and Therese, 18 months. We were doing some work around the house, and I had decided to go up north to get some stuff for the renovations. So I was asking Norcan to come with me. I remember that it was lovely. It was serene. It was just peaceful. You could hear the birds singing, and I felt peaceful at the time. So you know the way when a car's open, children love playing in the car. So they were playing happily, and I was asking Norcan just to get them tied into the car till we get going. So when Norcan got up to do that, I remember him saying, "Where's Therese?" Now, at that point, I just said, "She's there somewhere." And the both of us were looking around the back of the house. We were calling her. There was no sign of her. I was starting to get a bit nervous. Where is she? You know? When the real panic hit in was when I went walking one side of the house and Norcan went the other side. We came round either side of the house simultaneously, and we just looked at each other, and panic set in at that point. The first thing I thought of was the pond. I just made a direct beeline through a flower bed, just straight over, and so did Lorcan. I will never forget, to the day I die, the image of Therese. She was floating in the pond. She was sideways, so I just jumped in straight away. And I came behind her. She was unresponsive. I was just completely aware of that. she wasn't responding. She was dead. You know, as far as I was concerned, how she felt in my arms, it was different than the child that's moving and alive. She felt like a big swollen rubber doll. I brought her to the side and I placed her face up at the side of the pond. CPR was what I was thinking at that point. So I managed to drag myself out of the pond and I started CPR and I was shouting at Lorcan, ring emergency services, ring emergency services. And Lorcan didn't know the number for emergency services. He was probably shouting that back at me, but my priority was CPR. The training that I had received in first aid and CPR was just subconsciously coming out. Lorcan rang his friend Ryan, neighbours of ours. He just says, what's the number for emergency services? And he rang 999. Lorcan was directed to put the phone on loudspeaker and put it down beside me. So they started directing me, counting the 30 to 2. Now the grace of God was there with Lorcan ringing Ryan, because Ryan's family thought that maybe I went into labour and they came straight down. I remember roaring at the top of my lungs. I never thought that I could shout so loud. I was shouting for help. I was roaring and I was doing this at the same time. So Ian Johnson and Ryan pulled up. Ryan started looking after Ava, the emergency services, on the phone. He said to me, if there's somebody there that can help, let them help. And Ian came up behind me and he said to me, Melinda, I can help. So I remember going around the other side of Therese and Ian started doing the compressions and I was doing the 2 breaths. And the paramedic on the phone was at that point starting to tell us how long it was going to be till the ambulance was coming. I don't know the time, but I would say 15 to 20 minutes, we'll say, before an ambulance came. But I remember him saying, just keep going. And he made it very clear that we were not to stop. So the ambulance came and took over. And the first thing that I started to do was pray. Because at that point, there is this element of trust. I knew that they were going to do the very best that they could. I trusted in them and I trusted in God. And I handed her over to God because I have a lot of faith. I love God and only for him, you know. And the way I kind of loved it at that point was he had given me this child. He loved her more than I did. And Therese was in his hands at that point. So the only thing that I could do was pray. All of a sudden, the place was packed. The whole drive, it was just backed up with between ambulance, fire brigade, Gardaí. Everybody just got to work. Everybody just started doing what they were meant to be doing. I remember just looking around and thinking, oh, it just seemed so harrowing. Rosemary, Ian's wife, was trying to get me upstairs to change my clothes. Rosemary had rang my husband Paul. He was working in Belfast. And she said to him, look, there's an accident, you need to come home. But she didn't tell Paul what the accident was. He just dropped everything and ran for the car. He was trying to ring everybody he could. It was spreading like wildfire, you know, at that point. So he could get in contact with nobody. One of the times he rang my phone, a friend of mine answered. He asked to speak to me. I didn't know this until 6 years later, that I was on the phone to him. He was not able to get anything out of me. I was just bawling my eyes out. I gave him absolutely no information. So he got off the phone, still not really knowing what had happened. And he managed to get through to his mother. And his mother asked him, was she dead? She didn't know. They didn't know whether she was dead. He didn't know what the accident was. And then he got really scared.
At this extremely frightening scene, everybody gave everything to fight for Therese's life. In these moments, the body's fight or flight response kicks in. Adrenaline heightens focus, quickens reaction time, and drives action under intense pressure. Therese was taken by ambulance to a field where a helicopter would bring her to a Dublin hospital. Melinda was escorted to the scene, waiting anxiously and wondering why it was taking so long for her daughter to emerge from the ambulance. When Therese was transferred to the helicopter, Melinda was told that she couldn't accompany her due to how far along she was in her pregnancy. Accepting of this, she surrendered the situation to her fate, trusting that everything would be done through those helping to save her baby's life.
Therese went on in the air ambulance. I was on my way up the M1 with the guards, and I was just praying the rosary. When I got to the hospital, I was in this room. The first person that came was Paul, and I was just staring at the ground. But I remember him just coming over and giving me a hug. But that hug just spoke 1,000 words, because I knew there was no blame. We were just there to find out, was she dead or alive? The first person that came out was a doctor. My question was, is she alive? And she didn't answer me directly. I think she didn't want to give us false hope. She was avoiding answering the question because the situation was so stark. They were not expecting Therese to survive, but they were working really hard on her. And I will never forget the words that doctor said to me. In my 25 years of experience, if she survives, the brain damage will be catastrophic. The next people that came was my mother and father and Therese's godfather. Everybody was just in shock. I continued Hail Mary full of grace, and they just joined in, and that's what we were doing. The next thing I really remember is ICU. Two consultants. One of those was Dr. Kathy Gibbons. They told us that Therese's heart had stopped twice, and if it stopped again, that they would be inclined not to resuscitate her. Resuscitating somebody takes an awful lot out of them, and because it had been so long from the time of the accident until she got to hospital, the prognosis was very slim for her survival. She was critical at this stage. The chances of her surviving were little to none. They were not prepared to resuscitate her again. I know everybody's different, and I can only speak for myself, but I was accepting of that. I had handed her over to God, and I mean that. That's how strong my faith is. I wasn't going to start arguing with the doctors. There wouldn't have been much hope for her if her heart had stopped again. But thanks be to God, Therese's heart never stopped again. Still a very, very sick baby.
Melinda, can you remember how you and Paul were managing to keep your heads above water at that time?
I think for Paul, the huge trauma for him was in that room in ICU, seeing his little girl hooked up to so many machines and everything's beeping and beeping. So Paul kind of zoned in on all that. He zoned in on her stats. He zoned in on her oxygen levels. So how he coped over the coming days was, he was watching these machines like a hawk. And that is his trauma. He cannot go into a hospital. Sounds in hospitals like that will haunt him to the day he dies. It was different for me. I was disconnected from the machines, but I wasn't disconnected from the situation. For me, it's that trust in God. And also, I think when you're 39 weeks pregnant, you're just playing a waiting game anyway, getting up every day and thinking, will I have the baby today? So the experience in the hospital was like that for me. I wasn't thinking ahead. Is she going to die in the next hour? I was just being present, actually. I remember when Paul's parents arrived then, we were in the waiting room, and Paul was the one sitting staring blankly at that point. His mother came over and sat beside him, and I don't even think that there was any words, but I could just see the vulnerability. A mother just wanting to do something to help her son. And she just sat beside him, and you could see in her this longing to protect her son, and him just in the depths of despair, and you could see how she felt about it.
What were the first glimpses of real hope for Therese's recovery? To be honest with you, Carol, the glimpse of hope for me was that she was still alive. I wasn't seeing anything past that. But medically, the first glimpse of hope happened in the first few days. But I didn't know a child in that kind of state would have involuntary movement. To us would have been looking like, oh, she's moving. The doctors and the nurses would have been explaining that she's not. They were really concerned about her brain activity at this point. That's what they were watching. I remember being in the room and Dr. Kathy was there, and all of a sudden she got excited because whatever movement she made with her head wasn't involuntary. And that was her first glimmer of hope. She was very happy. The MRI was a huge one. There was a lot of prayer going on. Father Owen decided to have a mass in my local church to pray for Therese's recovery and her healing. You could also watch it online. Therese was after having her scan. We had headed down to a restaurant to watch this mass on the phone. Just in the middle of mass, the phone started ringing. I was saying to Paul, who is ringing us? I wanted to hear what Father Owen was saying. But the news I ended up hearing was every bit as good, if not better. It was the hospital ringing to say that the results of Therese's MRI was clear.
Oh my God.
Clear, yeah. That was probably when, it was a miracle. The doctors, the nurses, they were astonished. And everybody was astonished. But that happened during the mass that was being prayed for Therese. Then the first time her opening her eyes, I was there. I got very excited and I overwhelmed her a little bit. The nurse had to tell me to settle down. Because I was like, come on, Therese. And she could obviously hear me because the machines were big, 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 big. So I had to calm it down a little bit. I will never forget the smell of roses. It was ICU, you know what I mean? There's not a flower in sight. But at the smell of the roses, I just couldn't cope anymore. I was crying my eyes out and I says, Lord, I just cannot cope because it was really, really a strong smell of roses. Like, it wasn't a coincidence. Yes. As hope slowly began to return, there was a growing belief within Therese's family that recovery might truly be possible. But life did not pause. Melinda was heavily pregnant, exhausted, and fearful, knowing that her baby would arrive at any moment. She was admitted to a maternity hospital where she was induced, and on the 9th day of a novena she had been praying to St. Therese, baby Roisin was born. For Melinda, the timing felt deeply meaningful. Even after giving birth, Melinda's heart never left Therese's bedside. Slowly, against all odds, signs of recovery began to appear. Although Therese had experienced seizures, there was growing hope. Physiotherapy began, and small improvements became huge milestones. Doctors were still preparing for the unknown. A special chair and protective helmet had been made for Therese in case she suffered falls. But something incredible happened. Therese never needed the chair, she never needed the helmet, and to the shock of her family and medical staff alike, after everything this little girl had endured, it felt almost impossible to comprehend. After 4 long weeks in hospital, the Hickey family were finally going home. Therese left the hospital singing and walking. Neighbours, friends, and family members gathered outside waiting for them, celebrating the return of a family they had carried in their heart for weeks. But although they were finally home together, the trauma they had lived through did not simply disappear. The healing journey with the Hickey family was only just beginning. Melinda, you're home at last. How was that? How are you all coping? I don't know if we did cope. We survived. And being honest with you, 6 years later, I think we have been in survival mode ever since. I've thought about this since you asked me. We've stayed in fight or flight, Carol. I learned a lot. You introduced me to the polyvagal theory about going from fight or flight to a burnout to just being happy.
I don't know in the last 6 years whether me and Paul have ever got to the stage of just being happy. Life has been really difficult. Both of us has suffered a lot of anxiety. My brother took his own life 2 years before Therese's accident. So I would have experienced a lot of trauma that time. And what I've learned over the last couple of years is the significance of trauma. Everybody experienced the trauma in a different way.
What advice, if you had anything to say to people following your experience, what would it be?
The first aid, the CPR, would be the main thing. There was absolutely nobody else in our house that knew how to do that. The only reason I did first aid training was because of my work. When we met on the online CPR, Carol, I remember you saying that Melinda's hands became Therese's heart. And you don't realise the importance of that. That was the first step in saving her life. Be careful with water and children. Our pond was an ornamental pond. We actually didn't even have it filled. It was rainwater that was in it. I would have heard about the amount of people that went out and emptied their paddling pools at night. So I suppose that's one of the things. At the end of the day, it was an accident. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it does happen. And just to be able to accept that accidents happen. Paul, when he met me in the hospital, I probably was thinking, is he going to be mad with me? But Paul was blaming himself as well. Why hadn't I got it emptied? I never even thought of blaming him. There's no point in going down that road, so you have to be there for each other. You need to go easy on yourself, be kind to yourself, because you're after going through a lot of trauma. We have to love ourselves, and we have to go easy on ourselves, and we have to realise that it's okay not to be okay. Now just try and get through the day the best you can. I find people saying in different situations, I know I shouldn't be feeling like this. And I'd be like, but no, you should be feeling like this. The problem is that we don't acknowledge what we're feeling or the gravity of what has happened.
Yes.
Obviously, it could have been a lot worse, but that doesn't mean that you didn't experience that trauma and you're okay. It's important, especially in a case where it is a good news story. People kind of feel that you should be so grateful and everything's great. But at the end of the day, trauma is trauma and suffering is suffering, and there's healing needed for it. On this particular day, I knew that nobody else or nothing else was going to be able to help her except God. And that's exactly how he worked in that situation. Kathy Gibbons said, if you're lucky, you'll have one miracle when your time as a doctor, and Therese was hers.
Therese is now 7 years old and thriving, and in her second year of primary school. Remarkably, she has experienced no long-term effects from the events of that day. She is a happy, healthy little girl who has continued to reach every developmental milestone along the way. And so much of that story comes back to those critical first moments, to the quick thinking, courage, and immediate actions of her mum. In a situation where every second mattered, Melinda acted, and those actions helped give her daughter the chance not only to survive, but to truly live. Cardiac arrest does not only happen in hospital. It happens in homes, gardens, workplaces, sports fields, and ordinary communities, often without warning. But survival, as we have seen, is possible. Not simply because of luck, but because somebody recognised the signs, somebody stepped forward, and somebody acted. Science shows us that the first few moments during a cardiac arrest are absolutely critical. The brain and body are rapidly being deprived of oxygen, and every second without intervention matters. Early recognition, early CPR, early defibrillation. These are not just medical phrases, they are life-saving actions that ordinary people can learn. So remember the signs of cardiac arrest: not responding, not breathing normally, or only gasping. Gasping is not normal breathing. If you see these signs, call 112. Send somebody for an AED and start CPR immediately. Place your hands in the center of the chest and push hard, fast, and allow the chest to fully recoil between compressions. Give 30 compressions followed by 2 breaths. And if rescue breaths are not something you feel comfortable giving, hands-only CPR is still better than doing nothing. Because during CPR, your hands are helping to manually pump blood and oxygen around the body, keeping the brain and vital organs alive until emergency services take over. When the AED arrives, you use it straight away. You simply press the universal on button and follow its guidelines. So take time to learn CPR. Learn the signs of cardiac arrest. Know where your nearest AED is located, because one day the life depending on those skills may belong to somebody that you love. And sometimes the difference between life and death begins with one person deciding to act.